Maybe I start.
Sure, Venerable. Yes.
Okay. To encourage people to come on time, because if I start too late, I continue too late, and people might have other plans for later today. So welcome everyone. Nice to see you again. We're going to continue our journey into living life to the fullest. I don't know, maybe we use a few minutes of time to settle our mind in the present moment so that we have a better focus, a better concentration, and so that we can get more out of the teachings. So just for yourself, make sure that you sit comfortable in the space that you are in. And close your eyes just for a few minutes. Focus all your awareness on your body. Bring all your thoughts to the present moment, which is where your body is. The better you can focus your mind, the more you get out of these teachings, the better you are prepared for whatever is going to happen in the future. The more tools you have to deal with things that are still waiting from the past. And then generate a motivation for yourself, the reason why you are here, what you would like to get out of this course, what you would like to learn. And make a strong determination out of that. And then relax your attention. And I'll give a little recap from what we did yesterday. So yesterday I gave a little introduction on what we are going to do in this course. And not just an introduction, but I also invited you to connect your personal situation to the teachings that we're going to talk about. So I ask you to call to mind the difficulties that you are in at the moment and how you feel about that. And after you know how you feel about it, you can observe how you are reacting to your situation or to your feelings and to what you need at the moment to live your life to the fullest. What kind of skills could help to reduce your problems, your suffering? What kind of skills could help you to take more of the essence of life? And I hope that you wrote something down or that you can remember or recall what your situation and your feelings and your reactions are. Because, you know, that is the only thing that we can really use in order to practice Buddha's teachings. That is our material. That is, how you say that? That's what that is what the universe gave us. That is the situation that we are at the moment. It's there is nothing else that we can work on except that. And so having recollected investigate it, come to a conclusion with respect to ourselves, then we need to remember that we are living in degenerate times where coming out of difficult situations is extremely difficult, where finding happiness is very difficult, where creating merit is very difficult, where releasing the suffering, finding ways out of the suffering is very difficult, but every step you make is extremely powerful. You know, so don't give up, never give up, especially not in this time. So when problems are coming to our life, what happens with the mind is that we do not like to be here. So either we get a bit anxious because of what might happen in the future if we cannot resolve this problem, or we might keep hanging into a mind that says, but I have to deal with this, but I don't want to deal with that, and I just push it away and I pretend that it's not there, and you know, we have a kind of aversion. And both reactions, that the mind gets distracted towards the future or the mind keeps hanging in the past, they take us away from the present moment. And only in the present moment can we live life to the fullest. So how do we bring the mind back to the present moment? And I'm sure many of you have heard of mindfulness techniques, or maybe you have done some courses in learning to be more mindful. And so you learn how to bring the mind to the present moment. You learn how to bring the mind to the body. You learn to notice when the mind is distracted and then to bring it back. But maybe you have also noticed that then when problems come, that is maybe not enough. When problems come, the mind is still there. When problems come, the mind might still go in denial. When things do not get resolved from the past, the mind will still keep going towards the past. And so then you get into a situation where you tell yourself, bring the mind back, bring the mind back. But actually, maybe internally you feel, oh, no, but I have to think about the past because I want to resolve these issues. Or maybe you feel, but I have to worry about the future because how else do I going to solve my problems that are going to come in the future? So how can we become more mindful if the technique of bringing the mind back is not strong enough? Or maybe we could say, how could we help that technique? Or how could we add some techniques so that bringing back the mind to the present moment becomes easier and more fruitful? And I thought, when I was thinking about how can we talk about that, I came across some text on the Four Noble Truths, and then I thought, or maybe actually thinking about the first noble truth is a very good way to help the mind to come back to the present moment. And I will try to explain you why that could be helpful. So the Four Noble Truths is the first teaching that the Buddha ever gave. And the Four Noble Truths are, just to recap, and I'm sure you all heard about that, it's the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path. And so what we all have in common is that we all want to be happy. We do not want to suffer, right? We share that with all human beings. We share that with all animals. And in Buddhism, it says we share that with all sentient beings. Wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer is something very instinctive and innate. And so when we hear the teachings and we from the Buddha, or we hear teachings from other traditions, sometimes we hear that we need to give up happiness, you know, oh, we just have to learn to be with the suffering. And what we then hear is, I need to give up striving for happiness. Maybe you think, oh, but when I strive for happiness, I'm selfish, or maybe you feel that you are a sinner. that you somehow are not allowed to do that you're not a good person when you do that. But Buddha doesn't say that. Buddha totally validates our wish to be happy. And he encourages us, I would say, to strive for happiness. You know, living life to the fullest means to come to the experience of perfect happiness, to find that happiness. His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, we all have the right to fulfill the aspiration of finding happiness. He says, seeking happiness is the purpose of life. And I've also once spoken to Sakon Rinpoche. You know, I was myself a little bit like, oh, why am I doing this? And what is the meaning of life? And so I went to him with that question, and he looked. I said, you Westerners always talking about the meaning of life. What is the meaning of life? Just being happy. Being happy is the meaning of life. And I was taken back a little bit, and I thought, really? You know, is that it? Is that it? Just being happy? But then when you really listen to the teachings, then yes, being happy is the purpose of life. But the problem that we have is that the way we find happiness is often creating more suffering. The way we try to find happiness is not always a proper way of finding happiness. It can lead to the opposite. And if it leads to some happiness, it's not real happiness. It's a kind of pleasure which is coming and going, which is not stable, which is unfulfilling. And so striving for happiness means asking yourself, what is actually the way of finding happiness? What is real happiness? How does it look like? And how can we find it? And then striving for that. So that is actually what we do in Buddhism. In the same way, we can say that about suffering. You know, suffering has sometimes, when we suffer, let me say it like that, when suffering comes to us, by accepting the suffering, we can learn a lot from the suffering. So there are some qualities that we can gain from experiencing suffering. But that doesn't mean that we should never avoid suffering. That does not mean that we should look for suffering. And it is totally valid to have the aspiration to be free of suffering. It is just that the way that we try to become free from suffering at the moment is not really leading to a freedom from suffering. And so Buddhism teaches ways that are more skillful in finding a way of becoming fully free from suffering. If the way we look for happiness and freedom from suffering at the moment was a skillful way, or was a way that is successful, we would all know how to find happiness. We would all know how to find freedom from suffering. But we don't, right? I know that at a certain time, I think I was in my 50s, and I thought, I still don't know how to do it, you know. I'll try it again, but I'm still not sure if I do this and this and this, I'm going to find happiness. And it is like this, you think you're going to get it, and then something is not completely right, and you think, did I do something wrong? Maybe I should try it again. Maybe I should try harder. Maybe I should do better. Maybe I change this a little bit. Maybe then I will be successful. But the problem or the thing that causes the problem is the way we try to look for happiness. So I want you to really remember, you know, that your wish for happiness is perfectly valid, and you should follow that wish. We should just add wisdom to that, so that the wisdom becomes, so that our finding for our wish for happiness becomes fruitful, can become fruitful. It is our wish for happiness that brings us to the fulfillment of our potential. It is the wish for happiness that brings us to the place where we can feel that we are living life to the fullest. So the way we look for happiness, you can think, if I want to be happy, if I feel a little bit down, or I feel sad, or I feel, what do I do in order to find happiness? What do you do? Some people, I've heard one student, she said, oh, I go to the shop and I buy a new pair of shoes. She says, I always get happy when I buy new shoes. And then she says, I put them in the cupboard. I have hundreds of pairs of shoes in the cupboard and I never wear them, but I just get happy when I buy them. It can help, but it's a little bit, right? It is like a Band-Aid that we put on. We can go for a nice meal. We can call a friend and have a conversation. Sometimes people like to work with colors, or they listen to beautiful music. But we look for something that is connected to the sense pleasures in order to, what we feel, create happiness, trigger the feeling of happiness. And that happiness, if we are honest, is not lasting. It lasts a little bit, sometimes enough to get us out of that negative spiral, sometimes enough to get us out of that dark place, sometimes enough to let go of that sorrow that the mind was so occupied in. And so then temporarily it has done its job, but if that is the only thing that we have, we need to keep repeating this every time when we are in a, not so pleasant space. It will never bring you the solution that you will always be out of that unhappiness and you will always stay in that happiness. It doesn't have the capacity to do so. True? Try to think about that, because when you see, that is a Band-Aid and it is not more than that. It is not a problem to use it as a Band-Aid, but it's not of the end of your attempt in finding happiness. Then you need to do something else. And so if we look into how we free ourselves from suffering, then what we do is, when we experience pain or we experience unpleasantness, we have this tendency in us that we want to move away from it, right? We have this aversion. We have this inner compass that says, oh, I don't like this. And when we don't like it, we have the feeling it's not good for me. And when we feel it's not good for me, then we walk away from it. We might fight it. We judge it as something negative. Many things we do, not to feel it, not to be with it, to move away from it. In Buddhism, we call that the suffering of suffering. Pain and unpleasantness is just one level of suffering. Right? Buddhism says suffering is actually much deeper. Suffering is like the ocean. It is so vast and so deep. And so if we really want to be free from suffering, we need to look into that ocean, like, oh, what is all part of that? Not just on the surface, but what if we go deeper? Then what is actually in the nature of suffering? What does suffering entail? Suffering is by definition something that we do not like. In Buddhism, that is the definition. Suffering is something that we do not like. So looking into suffering is looking into something that we do not like. So we don't like that. Right? But in order to understand it and to see it, we have to look into it. Right? True. So I think we need to create some kind of environment or condition that we feel, oh, I can actually look into that suffering, because if I understand that better, I actually going to get something out of it that is going to help me in the long run. Or we can say, you know, that suffering, although it feels horrible, it is not something that is going to last forever. It is a temporary thing. Or when I look into suffering, suffering is not our true nature. You know, this is not in our true nature. When we discover our true nature, there is freedom, and freedom from suffering and happiness. So in order to find a way to our own true nature, we need to understand that suffering. Right? It's not that we go into the suffering knowing that actually we can never get out of suffering. Well, that would be torture. Right? If there was no way out of suffering, and I'm going to talk to you about suffering and all the different kinds of suffering, and we have the feeling that we can never get out of it, you would become depressed, right? And it would be mean for me that I show you all these sufferings and there is no way out. So the only way that or the only reason that I'm very happy to show you is because there is a way out. It is not our everlasting situation. But if we know, if we acknowledge these kind of sufferings, that actually is going to help us to come out of the suffering more easy. All right, I need to prepare you a little bit, right, where I'm going today. So Buddha said in talking speaking about the Four Noble Truths, sometimes that is compared to the 4 stages of curing an illness. And it was Maitreya who compared the Four Noble Truths with the 4 stages of curing an illness. And he said, first, you need to diagnose the illness. You need to know all the symptoms, right? You go to the doctor and you say, oh, you know, I have this thing and it's coming back again and again. Sometimes it's gone and then it's there again. And I've tried this and this and this, but it didn't really all help me. Then the doctor says, okay, what are the symptoms? Do you have problems with this? Do you have problems with that? And he goes deeply in it. And maybe he's even going to talk about things that you actually didn't want to talk about. But by doing that, he can come to the right diagnosis. And only when you have the right diagnosis, you can say, okay, then what actually causes that illness? You look into the causes. And when you find the causes, then you can understand whether or not you can cure the illness. You know, normally when something has causes, we can create different causes in order to move away from whatever was created. If we do not know the causes, and for instance, our actions are the causes of our illness, we just keep creating the causes and we keep creating the illness. Right? So then we want to know the causes. And once we know the causes, we know that by changing the causes, we can change the illness, and maybe we can even get rid of the illness. And so when you know that you can change the causes and conditions, then maybe you can create a conviction that if I work hard enough, I can actually overcome the illness. I can actually become totally free of the illness. And so with that conviction, you can then take the medicine and do whatever other therapy your doctor advises you to do. Right? We need that knowledge. On the basis of knowledge, we can move. We are prepared to do what is needed to move away from the suffering. One of our problems is that we are so used to suffering, you know, not just suffering, but also that life, you know, things are coming and going. Sometimes things go well, sometimes things don't go so well. We function in a certain way, we react in a certain way. We are so habituated to that, that if you would imagine yourself as someone who is completely free of suffering, you think, don't know how to do that. Is that really a possibility? I don't know how I can imagine myself like that is a possibility. Right? That's what I'm just talking about me, you know. I don't know if that is for you the same. That it is hard to imagine to be completely free of suffering. And so if it is hard to imagine to be completely free of suffering, part of us is still holding some of these causes and conditions that actually are the cause for suffering. Right? And that's not something that we can change like that, you know, but it is something that we can observe. And by knowing that we are doing that, what we can do is maybe thinking, can I be free of part of my suffering? You know, can I imagine myself without this and this habit that I have? Can I imagine myself without getting sick all the time? Can I imagine myself without getting into trouble all the time? Can I imagine myself as, you know, if you, for instance, have problems with communication, can I imagine myself as someone who is very good in communication? Can I imagine, what, you know, whatever you feel is holding you back, can I imagine myself without that? The moment you can imagine yourself without that, you have a huge motivator to really become like that. You know, nothing that is holding us back at the moment is part of our innate true nature. Whatever is holding us back is something that we have learned due to causes and conditions. It's not part of our authentic nature. Our authentic nature lives to the fullest. No fears, no obstructions. Nothing is holding it back. And so in order to live life to the fullest, it is good to know all the sufferings and at the same time imagine yourself without it. And so in that field, there is a space to take the remedy and to practice the teachings. Can you see that? So let's go to the diagnosis, the first noble truth, where the Buddha talks about the truth of suffering. And suffering is for us maybe a too heavy word. You know, what he actually used is the word of dukkha. And dukkha means intolerable or unsustainable or difficult to endure. But it can also mean imperfect or unsatisfying or incapable of providing perfect happiness. You know, and if we look into the good moments that we have in samsara, maybe we can see that even these good moments, they're not completely perfect. That's, you know, often we have this feeling that something is missing. Or we have the feeling that if we just had done this and this, it could have become a little bit better. Or, you know, maybe we think, you know, you go for this perfect meal and you spend all this money and having this beautiful meal. But actually your stomach was too full when you ate it, so you couldn't really enjoy it. Or you got this phone call from your mom before and she was agitating you and you couldn't really fully enjoy the meal. There is always something that makes it not completely perfect. And even if it is perfect, how long does it last? You know, within no time, this feeling of, I need something else is coming. So that, the Buddha says, that is the truth of suffering. That is the suffering. It is not just the pains that we experience. It is not just the illnesses that we experience. It is this constant changeable nature where things coming and going, and where whatever is coming, no matter how good it is, it's never going to last. Whatever is coming is always, I don't know, coming with a feeling of missing. And what we would like, if we really check what we want, is that we are looking for a stable happiness, a happiness that is going to stay, right? Some people say, no, I'm only going to be happy if I also have some suffering. But if you see how we strive for happiness, then we want something that is there. Stable, not changing, and there always, through whatever we experience. So if we talk about life is the truth of suffering, or life is suffering, what we mean is that life, the nature of life, is dissatisfactory. There is never satisfaction. There is never perfect happiness. Whatever we do will not continue. There is always, we always have to put an effort in order to have a good experience. And so the truth of suffering refers to our state of existence. It refers to our body and our mind. It refers to our body and our mind being conditioned by karma, having the delusions and the afflictive emotions. They are obscuring our nature, and they are causing us to engage in actions, and they are causing us to go through these fluctuations. And so with respect to the First Noble Truth, the Buddha spoke about 4 aspects in order to connect or recognize the truth. These 4 aspects, they counteract our own thinking. So we have certain ideas about reality, right? And the Buddha says, well, they're actually not that much in touch with reality. They are actually out of touch with reality. So in order to counteract our convictions with respect to reality, he spoke about that this is the truth. This is how it actually is. And so today I'll talk about the first 2 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, which are impermanent and suffering. And tomorrow I will speak about the second, the third, and the fourth aspect of the First Noble Truth, which is empty and selfless. So then we're going to look more at the self. But today, looking at impermanent and suffering. So why when we speak about the truth of suffering, the Buddha always spoke about what he calls the contaminated aggregates. The aggregates in Buddhism are the body, the physical aspect, and then there are 4 aspects of the mind, which is feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, which is any reaction that follows from feeling and discrimination, and then the mind itself, the main mind itself. So we are experiencing life through these 5 aggregates, right? When we feel something, there is a bodily aspect and there is a mental aspect. So we have the appearance that our body and our mind are permanent. We have the appearance that our body and our mind are lasting. True. If we think about death, then often, I don't know, I often think, but I'm not going to die. You know, everybody else maybe is going to die, but me not. That's very childish, you know, but I still have these thoughts. Even if I practice Buddhism for a long time, even if I meditated on death for a long time, even if I think about it often, still I have these spontaneous thoughts coming, but I'm not going to die. Right? Somehow we're permanent. I also have the feeling that my mind is constantly, there is a constant presence, you know, that feels almost like unchanging. But of course, my mind is changing every moment. But at the same time, it feels like, you know, it always was here, it's always going to be here, it's never going to go away. I experience my mind through a human body. But in my experience, I believe, or there is a feeling that even if I leave the body, I will experience the mind in the same way. I don't know. These are my experiences, right? You might experience something very different. But somehow we all grasp at permanence. We all hold on to the body and the mind as being more permanent than they are in actuality. And so thinking about impermanence helps us to become familiar with the reality that our contaminated aggregates, our body and our mind, are changing moment to moment. And because they're changing to moment, they're not everlasting. They come and they go, and they're every time different. And so impermanence is a very important contemplation in order to become more present in reality. Our you know, thinking that everything is permanent, thinking that everything is going to last, thinking that these thoughts take us away from how things actually are. So therefore, these thoughts take us away from the present moment. These are like fantasies, not true. Right? And we keep thinking, I want to connect to the present moment. Well, if you want to connect to the present moment, you need to connect to how things are. True? Even if they're not as pleasant as you would like them to be. Once you connect and you are present, do you think that would make suffering more tolerable or less tolerable? Do you think you can bear the suffering better or less well when you connect with it? We believe, it's not yet, this is a deep-seated belief that when there is suffering, we have to get away. Right? That is intuitively, we do that. We want to get away. We disconnect. We don't want to feel it. We don't want to be there. So we disconnect from reality as it is. We move away from the present moment. So do you think that makes suffering more bearable or actually increases the suffering? Have you ever, when you are suffering, thought, what is actually going on there? Let me feel that. Let me connect with that. Let me investigate that. And what happens when you do that? What happens to the suffering? Does it become more or less? Or maybe first a little bit more and then less? Eric says yes. You recognize that. So when we have the courage to change that innate reaction of I want to get away from it, when we change it into say, I'm going to have a look at that. No, we actually do ourselves a favor and the suffering becomes less. So connecting with the truth, connecting with reality as it is, helps us to become more present and therefore helps to reduce the suffering. We are programmed in the opposite way. So when we practice it, we have to deprogram or reprogram our mind. And that takes time because the habituation is extremely deep, has been there according to Buddhism since beginningless time. So we have to put effort in again and again and again in order to change these habits. But these habits are not in our true nature, which means that we can change them. We can do things differently, and then we can start feeling that we can live life to the fullest. And so impermanence was the first aspect that we need to look at. You know, thinking that things are changing, thinking that things are never lasting. And so the second aspect of the First Noble Truth is the suffering. That the contaminated aggregates are in the nature of suffering. Somehow we believe that the body and the mind, there is a purity in that, and they are in the nature of happiness. We use our body and our mind to actualize happiness. So we believe if I do the right thing, I'm going to experience all kinds of happiness. Right? So Buddhism says this is not in accordance with reality. Our psychophysical aggregates are not unchanging, they are not pure, and they are not in the nature of happiness. So let's look into that nature of suffering. And Buddhism does that by contemplating all kinds of suffering that we experience. And I'll just want to touch it, you know, not to go too deep. And Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism loves to make these divisions. So they have the 8 types of suffering and the 6 types of suffering and the 3 types of suffering, which are all general sufferings that we can experience within cyclic existence, which means these are sufferings that we have in common with all human beings and with maybe also with animals, maybe also with other sentient beings. It is not something that only happens to us. For instance, the 8 types of suffering includes the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death, right? If we are kind of lucky, we will experience all of them, right? And maybe I should say, yeah, I'm including aging, thinking about old people, but actually in Buddhism, aging starts, I think, from the moment after birth or even the moment after conception. Aging is there all the time. Birth, we do not think of birth as being a suffering, right? We all have these extremely happy feelings when a new child is born, but we don't think what a child goes through in order to be born. Right? How painful that can be. And we know it's painful for the mother. We don't think it was painful for us too to come through the birth channel. Birth, if you think about it, and you can read about it in the Lamrim books, birth is an extremely painful process. Aging means that the body is changing all the time, right? Aging is when you have little children and they grow. In the first year, if you have seen a baby growing up, you know how frustrated they are every time when they are about to learn something new. and they're just not yet ready to do it. They get very frustrated, right? Suffering, there is just suffering. And then when they grow older, every step that they need to make, there is suffering. They're still not able to do this and this and this, and they're actually over that and that. And you know, when they start learning to walk, they fall a lot. When they can run, they fall a lot. When they can bike, they fall a lot. There was a lot of falling up and standing up again. There was a lot of falling and standing up again. Then when children grow faster, you know, when they're becoming teenagers, even the growing itself can be so painful. You have these boys that grow so fast, their bones grow so fast that they are in excruciating pain, right? And then we know that when we get older, I don't know, I always have the feeling every time when I get used to a certain age, I'm actually already 2 years older. I think, oh my gosh, I'm getting older, I need to adjust a little bit. And then before I know it, I'm even more old, I need to adjust more. It's like you can never catch up to the age where you are. You try to adjust, but you can't catch up. And then when you get older and older, you know, all the things that you have, that you got used to in your life of being able to do, you become less and less and less capable. Your eyes, they seem to function less. Your ears are functioning less. Your brain is functioning less. You become less clear, less fast. You can't keep up with the society because everything is going faster. Difficult, right? Aging is difficult. And if you see really old people, you know, I always had the feeling that's not going to happen to me, you know, because you're visualizing yourself in such an old body where you're always crippled, you know, because of you're being so old. You can hardly walk. You can hardly see. You know, these were normal people like you and me. These were healthy people like you and me. And they're still healthy, they're just old. And things don't function anymore, right? It's very painful because you have known yourself as a very healthy, fully functioning person, and now you function on a totally different level. You had to give up a lot of what you already had. Painful. And then the suffering of sickness that many of us go through is painful. The suffering of death, you know, leaving everything behind, even more painful. So we all go through that. But somehow we skip that, you know. We're not really fully aware that that is our reality. When we are sick, we think, oh, once I get over, I'm going to go back to normal life. You know, no, but sickness is part of your life. It's not something that you just have to get away from in order to be back to normal. It's part of your life. And so then when we go through life, we always meet with things that we don't like. Or when we have something that we like, we need to separate from that. Or when there is something that we would like to have, we can't get it. You know, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough merit, we don't have whatever, the right, whatever. We don't get it. That's suffering. You know, and Buddhism says as long as we are in the contaminated aggregates, as long as we have the body and the mind, we will experience suffering, because this is the basis for experiencing suffering. We have the basis. We have the basis in sense of we have the body, but then we also have the karma in the mind, the imprints in the mind that ripen at any moment into suffering experiences, can ripen into suffering experiences. So it is good to sometimes go through that and think, what are my sufferings that I meet on my path? you know, just to make sure that you don't just step over it. We also don't have to hang into it. You know, we need to find skillful ways of being with the suffering so that we are released as quickly as possible from the suffering. But we first have to accept them as being part of our journey. And so then we also contemplate the 6 types of sufferings, and I'm just going to read through that, which is like the suffering of uncertainty, that we never know really what is going to happen, that whatever we have, whether that is relationships or wealth or praise or fame or happiness, we never know how long it's going to last. It can change at any moment. So that can cause some kind of anxiety in us. Then there is the suffering of dissatisfaction, you know, that no matter what kind of pleasure we experience, we never are fully satisfied with that. And so then we keep repeating it in order to find that satisfaction, but it can never come. And then we have the suffering, and that is if we look into the big picture of samsara, of constantly being born again and again, having to let go of the body again and again. And then you are born somewhere and you never know what status you're going to have. Sometimes you have high status, sometimes you have low status. Sometimes you are very wealthy, you're very famous. Sometimes you are a beggar that nobody can stand. We do not know. Right? We do not know what kind of karma is going to ripen next. And then with all of that, our journey is quite lonely, right? When we are born, we get born into a family where we know nobody. We are all on our own. We have the feeling when we grow up, oh, I know these people, you know, because they are my family. But before you were born there, you didn't know them. So you're all alone coming into that family. And then when you leave the body, you are all alone and going on into your journey. And then in the meantime, from birth till death, it is sometimes we find people that we feel that we have a connection and we can share something, you know, but nobody really knows everything that is going on inside us. And it is impossible to share that with anyone, and every other person has totally different experiences, maybe going through a similar life, but a totally different mindset. And so in that we are also lonely, you know, whatever we experience, we can never share everything. Sometimes we can share a little bit with somebody, and that is already very precious. And so that journey all on our own is not easy, right? We need to be very compassionate with ourselves in going through that. And so these are all mostly sufferings of sufferings, things that we really recognize as suffering. And then Buddhism also explains the 3 types of suffering, and I won't be able to really go deeply into that, but Buddhism says also the pleasant experiences are actually in the nature of suffering. Pleasant experiences are only those moments where the big pains start to subside, they become less, and the next pain hasn't started to happen yet. These moments we call pleasure. But Buddhism says they are in the same nature as everything else. They're just not so loud. They're just not so intense. They're not so, we don't experience them as suffering. We call them pleasure, right? And if you think about that, and if you start observing that, you can see that what you experience as pleasure is that actually something that was unpleasant. For instance, I'm sitting here, I'm quite cold. And when I stay long enough in this place, then I'm getting more and more cold, especially when I cannot cover my arms. I get more and more cold, and at a certain point, so I'm suffering. And then I put on a warm jacket and I think, oh, this is so fantastic, right? Pleasure, the pleasure of the warmth. But then when I stay in that, at a certain point, that pleasure that starts quite soon to become less pleasure, and it becomes normal. And then maybe at a certain point, it changes into, it's warm here, you know, I'm taking off my jacket, right? The pleasure is where we change from the suffering, we change the activity into something else. So the suffering that we experience finishes, and the suffering of something new is about to begin. That's pleasure. So when you see that, it doesn't mean that we cannot experience pleasure, or we shouldn't experience pleasure, or we should never go there, or we should avoid it, or no, you know, at the same time, these moments of pleasures are a result of our merit. So when they arrive, when they come, we should fully enjoy them because we worked really hard for them. But we shouldn't see them as real happiness. We shouldn't see them as this is the max we can achieve. We shouldn't see them as this is all there is. You know, this is pleasure, which is, according to Buddhism, the suffering of change. And then there is an even deeper suffering, which is the all-pervasive suffering, which is actually the way that our mind is conditioned. Deep-seated beliefs about reality, about ourselves, about the world, about how things function, about why we do things in a certain situation. And so we repeat that, these beliefs, these conditioning, we repeat certain activities again and again and again, creating causes for more suffering, similar suffering again and again. Buddhism says that is the real suffering. That is the real cause of suffering, that we need to understand the all-pervasive suffering. And if we want to become free of all suffering, we need to eliminate the all-pervasive suffering, the suffering of conditioned existence. And so listening to these kinds of sufferings, you know, it's sometimes good to write down, oh, this and this and this and this is my suffering. And then you can think, do I recognize that as suffering? Or when it happens in my life, what do I do? You know, do I ignore it? Do I try to get out of it as soon as possible? And if so, how do I get out of it? How do I react to it? How do I think about it? And can I do that more skillfully? So that's something that I'm going to give to you to do later today or tomorrow morning. And so by thinking about impermanence and suffering, we look at how things are, although we don't like it. When we can see how things are and we can fully accept that, it is more easy to bring the mind to the present moment. Because the aversion for what is, we already moved that out of the way. Right? We have an aversion to see reality. So we don't want to be in the present moment. That aversion will all the time take us away, will distract us. Once we accept it, it's much easier to be in it, you know. And of course, then when you're going to embrace impermanence and suffering, the suffering nature of reality, we need skills to be with that, right? It's not easy to really be with all the suffering. How do we do that? So we will talk about that in this course. But that is the first step, is that we have the courage to go there. True. Do you have any questions? I know that I spoke a lot. I'm sorry if I hope it didn't overwhelm you. Sylvia says that I try to turn negative thoughts into positive. that can be a good way of changing. Sometimes it can also be useful to sit with negative thoughts and try to see where they're coming from. You know, what is actually deep down bothering you. Can be. But if you already have done that and the negative thoughts are still there, then of course you can also try to turn them into positive. Suket says he understood. Any other comments? Karen? Oh, wait a minute. Karen says, I know for certain that shoes, friends, meals out, band-aids are not a solution. That knowledge in itself makes me sad. This is where I've been stuck and where I need help to move beyond this. I don't feel the body is permanent. On the contrary, it is the realization that this body could cease tomorrow. And because I've not done enough to sort my mind out, this is all going to happen again, but potentially be even worse and in the lower realms. So that can be very scary if you go in that path. And I don't know, what helps me is that I think, you know, because I also feel that I do not take every opportunity to practice, and I'm not able to every time bring my mind to the virtue and to whatever. But I think, could I have done something more? Could I have done it differently? Or did I do in that moment what I could do? You know, and then feel that I have done the max I could do. I couldn't do anything more, you know, then I need to find peace with that. That is just the max I could do. And then I think you have to rethink that we are in degenerate times where it is so difficult to recognize these tendencies, where the teachings are not so available, where people who practice the teachings are very rare to find. So there are not many examples who can show you how to do things differently. And you have seen, oh, this Band-Aid doesn't help, but what does help? And how do I do it? Where are your examples? There are not many. So the conditions, you know, you need to be a little bit gentle with yourself. The conditions are just not there. And yeah, I mean, one teacher once said to me, you know, we all speak about the teachers like, oh, but I'm scared to go to the lower realms. And he said, listen, we all go. We all go. You don't even have to question that. You don't have to fear that. We all will go to the lower realms. But better we go with some kind of imprints related to the Buddha Dharma, because these imprints can help us to get out of these lower realms very quickly. So he was like, just accept that you're going there. But acknowledge all your imprints, acknowledge all your attempts that you have done, acknowledge the goodness that you have that is going to take you out of that suffering. And so, you know, I hope, maybe, I don't know, maybe at the end of the course, you can try to think, what is it that I can do in order to change my mind, or in order to, you know, because we look at ourselves and we are angry with ourselves, or we judge ourselves, or we think that we should do much more. But if we start with a very negative mind and a troubled mind, then we cannot expect that the next moment is going to be much, much better, even if we do the most perfect action, right? We will. So maybe you look at your actions and you try to adjust your actions so that you can say, I have done these and these actions, I have abandoned these and these actions, I have made all these imprints that are going to ripen into something positive. But for this life, I'm not going to feel that wonderful happiness that I would have liked to feel, but you can be sure that then somewhere in the next life it will come. I don't know if that helps, Karen. We're all a bit in the same boat, you know. We are living in a very difficult time. Ashok says, my suffering is never feeling content with what I have and being on the outlook for something better always. So that sounds like attachment, you know, the suffering from attachment. And I think day after tomorrow, we will look more into that specifically, because that is the huge suffering that we are all having, you know, and it is enormously promoted in society to live on attachment. If you do not use your attachment, there are a lot of stigmas that what you're doing is not successful, is not good enough, is not worthwhile, so we look into that day after tomorrow. Suket says, understood suffering and impermanence, unclear on how it helps to overcome suffering. Okay. So what we have done now is we have made a diagnosis. This is the suffering. Then we're going to say, okay, what are the causes of this suffering? So tomorrow we're going to talk about the self-grasping mind, how we grasp at a self. And with that, we talk about the last two aspects of the first noble truth. And then after that, we're going to look into the causes for our suffering, which is the self-grasping mind, but it is also the attachment and the aversion that comes from the self-grasping mind. And we're going to look into how we can counteract that, how we can recognize it, and then how we can counteract it. First, we need to know the truth. Then we can say, what can I do about it? Right? So that's what we're going to try to do. Overcoming suffering is, there are many ways that we can do things different. You know, there is a whole path that we can follow, and we can counteract the things that cause suffering. We can counteract them in many different ways. So I will try to cover quite some of them, and then you can practice. All right. Are there any more questions? Otherwise, we can do a meditation on the impermanent nature of, and I'm going to relate that to ourselves, the body and the mind. Thinking about impermanence is not something that you do one time and then you say, oh yeah, now I know it. Everything is impermanent. Thinking about impermanence, you do again and again and again and again, because we have deep-seated conceptions in the mind that everything that appears to us as being more permanent than it is in actuality. Whatever object we see appears as more permanent as it exists in actuality. Whatever appears is disintegrating in that very moment, but we do not see that disintegration happening. And because we don't see the disintegration happening, we believe it isn't happening. Right? So we need a thinking mind to remind ourselves that what our eyes are seeing or what our eyes are not seeing, the disintegration that we are not seeing, we need to remind ourselves with our intellectual mind constantly. And if you see how much time we spend with looking and with seeing things, and therefore with somehow getting an imprint in the mind that these things are not disintegrating, we need to counteract that by reminding ourselves again and again and again. Even if I see that that house is not disintegrating, it is, you know. I'm in Amsterdam at the moment, where you can see it is a very, very old city. It started in the 1500s, I think, 1600. So now you can see which many canals, very beautiful, very pretty, but things are is falling apart, right? It has been falling apart for a long time, but they will fix it up. And now they haven't fixed it up for many, many, many years. So now suddenly the canals, they start to, you know, the pathways next to the canals, they start to become very unstable. They start to fall into the canals, and it is like, oh my gosh, the city is falling apart. But that city has been falling apart for many, many, many years. It has been disintegrating for many years, but people didn't pay attention. They thought, oh, it's okay, it can be, it's all right, it's all right. And at a certain point, you have to pay the price if you want to keep things looking in a similar way. You have to maintain, right? It's not going to maintain itself. It's going to fall apart by itself. But we forget that because we don't see it. And so, same with suffering. We somehow ignore it. We don't want to see it. So we have to focus on it. We have to consciously contemplate on it. Then it starts to become more, you know, we stop running away from it, and it becomes more part of our reality. And then it can help us to open the heart and to be more present with the suffering. And that will change our reality in a positive way, you know. You might think, oh, that gives me more suffering, but actually, no, it gives you less suffering. That's a promise. All right, so tomorrow more about the self and the self-grasping mind and the self-cherishing mind, and how that is the cause of the creation of a lot of our suffering. So for the meditation, you can try to find a good posture. And yesterday we went through the meditation posture so that your posture becomes a tool to bring your mind to the present moment. Meditation always happens in the present moment, never in the past, never in the future. So when we bring our mind to the present moment by focusing the mind on the body, meditation becomes much easier. Our mind will be less distracted, and we will be able to be more focused on the topic itself. So whether you sit on a chair or on a cushion, make sure that your back is straight. Straight and at the same time relaxed. By rolling your pelvis forward, you let your vertebrae naturally stretch up, straighten up. You don't use your muscles to straighten up your back. And once you have done that, you can fully relax the muscles. You can let go your shoulders. And even the muscles along your spine, they can all relax. Your head is a little bit bent forward. This will help to calm your mind. Your tongue is touching the palate just behind the teeth. Your right hand is on top of the left, the thumbs slightly touching each other. The elbows away from the body. And the eyes are closed, but allow a little bit of light to come in so that it doesn't become too dark and the mind doesn't become too sleepy. And then first reflect on course and permanence, on how your body has been changing over the years. Think of the time that you were a little baby and envision yourself growing up. Becoming a teenager. Being in your 20s. All the way up to where you are today. And try to watch yourself going through these changes from a distance as an observer with no emotional involvement. And reflect on how your body will keep changing when you grow older. Visualize yourself at the end of your life, when your body has become more weak, your eyes and ears don't function so well anymore, and your skin has become wrinkled. And then think of the time that you have to leave this body. And the time that you actually have left your body. See how life continues, how your family and friends are still there. They're mourning for some time, and then they'll pick up their lives again. And then think of impermanence on a more subtle level. Impermanence means that things are changing moment to moment. And we can observe that really well in our own body. For instance, our organs, they are working constantly, Change happens there all the time. Our heart beats every second, pumping blood through the arteries. Our lungs are breathing in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide in every moment. Your liver and kidneys are detoxifying your body constantly. Your blood is flowing through your body, bringing nutrients everywhere in your body, removing toxins from everywhere in your body, toxins and waste. Although from the outside it appears as if the body is quite stable, the skin is holding everything together. But if we look a little bit deeper than the skin, there is a constant movement of activity in all the organs. And that activity is also even on a deeper level, on the cellular level. Cells are dying and are renewed in every moment. And within the cell, there is a lot of activity going on at every moment. Taking in nutrients, eliminating toxins, providing the cells with energy, producing energy. It's happening in every tiny cell that we cannot even perceive with our naked eye. And that nature of impermanence also happens on the level of the mind. We can connect with our feelings, with our experience, and reflect on how they come and go. And reflect on the fact that whatever experience arises in the mind, it doesn't have the capacity to stay. There is nothing that can arise in the mind and stay forever. Whatever arises naturally has to dissolve back into the mind. Another aspect of our mind is our discrimination. In dependence on feelings, we discriminate things as being good or bad. Try to see that that judgment changes with respect to the same object or person when the feelings change. There are people that we like for a period of time, and then at another moment of time, we don't like them anymore. And there are things that we don't like at a certain time, and later in life, we do like them. And in the same way, when feelings arise, our attachment and aversion arises in dependence on that. And so when feelings are changing, also our reactions change. Our mind is never the same. Even the self that we experience is never the same. And if you still have the feeling that your mind is quite the same, or there are some aspects of your mind that are quite the same, try to remember your mind when you were a little kid. And then move through your life, observing how your mind has changed over time again and again. In general, we do not like change. We like to keep things the way they are. Change requires that we are vividly present. Change gives us the feeling that we're not in control. Change comes with a feeling of unpredictability. We're not sure what is going to happen. We're not sure how we're going to react, whether or not we can handle what is going to come. Meditating on impermanence can help to become more comfortable with the ever-changing nature of things. We can't stop the impermanence of life. but we can become comfortable with that. We can learn how to be within that impermanence of life. And when we reflect on the impermanence of life, for instance, by observing our body and reflecting on our body and all the functions on the coarse and the subtle level, by connecting with our feelings, the other aspects of our mind, when we reflect in this way on impermanence, we bring the mind more to the present moment. And by doing that, the delusions that are normally produced in the mind, they subside. So the mind becomes more clear, less distracted, more calm, more peaceful. Try to recognize the good qualities that come from doing a meditation like this. By observing what this meditation has brought to you. How has your feeling changed? How does your mind feel right now? And then, having come to the conclusion of this meditation, we can dedicate all the positive energy that we have gathered by doing this session and doing this meditation to all sentient beings, human beings, animals, beings in other forms, wishing that they find happiness and well-being, and wishing that they're free of all their suffering. And with that, I would like to thank you for being here today. And I hope to see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
See you tomorrow.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.